Blood Money. Article by Anna von Reitz. Part 10. Additional issues for the International Court of Justice. Commodity rigging. It will come as a shock to many, but everything traded in this world is based on commodities. Labor is a commodity. Currencies are commodities. And despite a great deal of false advertising, all currencies, including the Federal Reserve notes, are asset-backed. It will also come as a shock that we have been using digital accounts since the 1930s, and all money of account has been created by the account holders themselves in a closed system of domestic legal tender. Whatever the currencies have been and however they have been traded as cash commodities, so far as the banks are concerned, these external tokens are converted into digital currency tokens and entered as digits, therefore digital on ledgers. Once entered on a bank ledger, these representations become both a liability for the bank and an endlessly fungible and malleable source of new currency credits. That is to say that a digit on a bank ledger can mean almost anything, and can be credited as almost anything too. A digit can be a ruble, it can be a yen, it can represent labor or gold or oil or steers in a feedlot. It's all the same to the digits. This is where the power of denomination comes in. The people who are the source of all these digits have the power to define the digits for the bank via their endorsement, but they seldom do. And the bank doesn't ask, because the bank would rather have the latitude to define the digits however they see fit. Thus, in America, the remedy to the debt slavery system that gives rise to the labor-backed Federal Reserve notes is to properly denominate the digits going into and coming out of your accounts as lawful money. This then allows people to escape the debt slavery model and forces the banks, at least on paper, to actually discharge the debt represented by the Federal Reserve promissory notes. That is, instead of allowing the debt to endlessly expand, the banks are required to redefine the digits and decrease the national debt by the redeemed amount when you denominate your deposits as lawful money. Lawful money is any form of currency issued by the United States Treasury and not the Federal Reserve System. It includes gold and silver coins, Treasury notes, and Treasury bonds. Lawful money stands in contrast to fiat money, in which the government assigns a value, although it has no intrinsic value of its own and is not backed by reserves. Unfortunately, almost no one existing outside the Beltway of Washington, D.C. was ever told a word about this cozy contrivance, and as a result, people did not know how to access the remedy and didn't know how to endorse their checks or how to denominate funds so as to reduce the so-called national debt. A sin by omission, and act of self-interested non-disclosure on the part of those offering the remedy, that eventually and arbitrarily allowed the U.S. national debt to balloon to over $25 trillion. Although it may not immediately jump off the page, this is the largest commodity rigging scheme in history, and the commodity being rigged on a stupendously large scale is labor. It was at this point that we raised our hands and said, but what about the equal national credit? In a debt-credit monetary system, all transactions are in fact zero-sum. The creation of a debt also creates an equal and answering credit. So, no national debt is possible unless the answering national credit is not being applied. This is as true in America as it is in Greece or Cambodia. The digits accounting for the national debt were being religiously accounted for. We even had a large neon-style ticker tape counter in Times Square, showing the second-by-second growth of the national debt. Not a whisper about the national credit. What happened to all those answering digits? They were being sequestered, siphoned off, and pooled in gigantic investment slush funds, used to buy majority interests in the Fortune 500 companies in America and eventually to dominate the stock markets worldwide. and also to buy large, large quantities of foreign currency. And all of this served to rig, first the labor market, and through this initial fraud, the rigging of all other commodities, including international currencies. The so-called Economic Stabilization Fund acquired enough of nearly every national currency to control it. Once that was accomplished, any national currency could be destroyed at will, either by hyperinflation or deflation, simply by dumping large amounts of that currency into the market, inflation, or deliberately taking it out of circulation, deflation. How, the court may ask, is this possible? Commodity rigging is illegal. So it is, except that once you remove both the gold and silver standard, there is no recognized standard commodity, and it becomes impossible to establish the value of any other commodity. If there is no known recognizable standard for commodity value, it's impossible to say that the commodity prices are rigged. Thus, commodity rigging becomes legal. We now observe the actual reason that the gold standard had to go, and the criminal motivation behind that removal. The ability to rig all commodity markets and all commodity prices and to artificially restrict access to commodities, including those needed to sustain life, water, and food, and shelter, has been the unholy grail of merchants since time began. And in this century, in this country, it was finally achieved, except that none of it actually belongs to the perpetrators of this scheme. They have bought, sold, and traded upon the assets of others, using the pretext that they represent us, when in fact they don't represent us and have no granted authority to do any of these things in our names. One of the princes in Europe gave the Rothschilds assets on loan, with a contract for a specific rate of return and date of repayment. They seized upon his assets, invested them, and paid him his expected return, keeping the rest of the profit for themselves. And that is all it took to spawn the history of banking as we have known it. The bankers and other corporate beneficiaries of all these schemes have assiduously seized upon assets belonging to the living people, have bought, sold, and traded these assets for us, and manipulated the outcomes to benefit themselves at our expense. Now the day of reckoning arrives, and we find $1 quintillion worth of unpaid labor bonds, our gold and silver purloined and stored offshore for safekeeping, controlling interest in virtually all productive capacity in every economic sector being held in our names, and unimaginably large slush funds, most of them being managed as combined pension fund associations, which are organized apparently to ensure liquidity of these funds 350 years into the future, while quibbling and denying a comfortable retirement to retirees who are alive right now. It is this underlying worldwide commodity rigging scheme that is the sacred cash cow around which all the wagons are circled. And while it is comforting to know that our public employees will be able to count on their pensions centuries from now, we do not consider that a reasonable definition of the public good here and now. And while this same commodity rigging scheme may warm the cockles of the hearts of those who have engineered it, a future determined by a meritocracy of crooks who have undermined and evaded the plainly stated public law in order to acquire all this wealth, is something that the rest of us object to. No matter how brilliant or motivated they may be, a crook is still a crook, and unjust enrichment is still as unjust. Our laws against commodity rigging, including currency commodity rigging, exist for a reason. This country is not, as some would claim, a nation of brigands. We have suffered as a result of these out-of-control corporations along with the rest of the world, and so we invite the high courts to support us in the exercise of our sovereign imperative to declare the peace, end enslavement, balance the books, restore a lawful monetary system, return prepaid credit owed to the people of the world, reform the corporations, dismantle the illegal commodity rigging scheme that has served to artificially impose the doctrine of scarcity, and educate everyone concerning the responsibilities that go with the freedoms that all men and women are heir to. We do not object at all to free discussion and future planning initiatives. We earnestly hope that the truly meritorious thinkers and inventors among us can be promoted and will be without political prejudice.